I'm 18 years old, going to be a freshman in college this September. This past July, my friend Miranda held a pool party in her backyard as a sort of graduation party, minus any of her family being around because her parents were away. She often has the house to herself, so her parents' house is the go-to spot for a lot of hangouts. She invited like 100 people from our grade. There had to be upwards of 150 people there at the night's peak. I was one of the first to show up with my friend Jonah, because we're close with Miranda, so we wanted to help out a little bit. By the time people started showing up, everyone congregated slowly from the kitchen and living room to outside in the backyard by the pool. Some people brought their bathing suits and jumped into the pool. Others just jumped in their underwear, and then of course most others just stood around the pool. She has a huge backyard. At a certain point, so many people were at the party that it was clear as day people were bringing friends from other schools because we didn't know everyone there, and Miranda was getting mad because she made it clear she didn't want randoms. In fact, unfamiliar people seemed to be just barging through the gate, not even accompanied with people from our school or grade. There wasn't much we could do though. The party was already too crazy to easily control. Miranda did throw in our class group chat not to bring any more randoms or they'd be asked to leave. The problem seemed to slow down after that. At around 1 a.m., police came to the house and had to shut down the party due to multiple complaints from neighbors. So the music was turned off, and 99% of the guests were asked to leave. Mostly everyone cleared out except a few close friends, including some of Miranda's girlfriends, Jonah and I, and a few other guy friends. We helped do some cleaning, like picking up all the empty cans and bottles. Eventually, it was just 4 of us left there. I'm talking at like 3 a.m., if not later. Since it was hot outside, we migrated to the inside of the house in the air conditioning, where we were just chilling in the living room continuing to drink. Then we all heard a distinct crack from upstairs, and we went silent. Miranda was the first to ask what was that, as we all looked at each other with these wide-eyed, half-laughing, half-freaked-out faces. Jonah and I laughed, teasing Miranda that someone was upstairs in her room, and she begged us to stop and check it out. So we did. We went upstairs to Miranda's room. It was clear. We then went to the guest room that used to be her older brother's room, and we found one of our friends, Steve, passed out in the bed. We went downstairs to tell her that Steve was upstairs and knocked out. I guess that gave her a sigh of relief. Looking back, that didn't much explain a sound coming from upstairs if he was knocked out in bed though. But we weren't exactly the most coherent at that moment. Eventually, Miranda and her friend Mel went to sleep in her room. Jonah fell asleep on the couch. I went to her parents' bed. None of us were okay to drive anywhere. I can't remember how much time passed before I remember one of the girls screaming in the next room over, and then both of them. It was a heart-dropping kind of moment, but I didn't know if they were messing around with each other at first or not. But I realized pretty quickly the screams were way too real. I burst out of the bed and went to Miranda's room and opened the door. The lights were out. I could barely see anything, except for the 2 girls huddled up hugging each other in the corner of the room, basically curled up on the floor. I saw what they were screaming at. There was a tall person in the opposite corner of the room, on the other side of the bed from them. I saw him looking at me in the doorway. I yelled at the girls to run, and they did. There was so much yelling that even Steve woke up and came out. As the girls ran downstairs screaming that the man was touching their feet, we followed. But looking back, with 3 guys there, we regrettably didn't try to overpower that one man. We all left the house, and one of us called the police, waiting by the neighbor's house with the neighbors, possibly the same ones who called the cops on the party. We didn't see the man leave the front door ever, and after police searched the house and couldn't find him, that meant he left through the back door. None of us recognized who that man was. It was probably an older man who knew Miranda somehow that snuck into the house during the commotion of the party and thought Miranda would be alone after the party. It's some sick, scary stuff. Whether we could have overpowered him or not, we'll never know, because we don't know if he was armed. There's a nice, quiet, scenic creek not far from my house. I like to drive my kayak up to it every once in a while on the weekends in the summer. This one particular weekend was one of those weekends. The weather was perfect, sunny and 70s. I'd kayaked down this creek a bunch of times, and never had I seen anyone else kayaking it. That's part of the reason I like it, because I'm a very reserved person and I like to do things myself, preferably with privacy. So I set out on the kayak not far from where I parked my car, which is some gravelly dirt parking area right off the road. There was one other car that pulled in a few minutes after I did, which was unusual. I'd never seen any other cars except my own here. 20 minutes into my kayaking, someone came out from the woods ahead of me coming up on the left and approached the edge of the water. He stopped and waved at me and smiled. He put his hands on his hips and greeted me. It seemed he had an expectation for me to stop and chat. I instantly knew I didn't like his smile, but my mother raised me to be polite to everybody, so I stopped paddling and smiled and greeted him back. There was an awkward pause where he was just nodding his head with his closed lips smile, and I had to break the silence by saying it's a beautiful day out. He nodded his head and said yup, then asked where I'm from. I made something up and said from up north, just visiting. He clearly lacked the ability to hold any sort of conversation, and that's coming from me, who's not the most social person myself, so I wanted to just move along. I told him to have a great rest of his day, and continued onward down the river. Never in a million years was I expecting what happened next to happen. I turned when I heard a snap of a stick or something from not far behind me. There in the not so far distance was the guy, hiding behind a couple trees, seemingly following me. I was disturbed and uncomfortable, like he was clearly trying to not be seen. I was scared to call him out in fear of how he might respond, so I pretended not to notice him and continued to kayak down the creek. I would continue to side glance every so often to see if he was still following me, and he was. I had never wanted to see someone else in the water so much in my life. I took out my phone to try to call my dad or my brother for help, but of course I had no cell reception out there. Still, instead of being followed and probably attacked, I decided to stop in my place, turn around, and threaten to call the police if he didn't stop following me. The man just stood in place behind another big tree, though he was clear as day there. I then decided to fake call the cops. I raised my phone in the air at the man, and I said, "I see you there, I'm calling them now." I then proceeded to fake a phone call, pretending like I'm talking to the police. The man started to walk away deeper into the woods. It seemed to have worked. I turned around immediately and started kayaking back up the way I came as fast as I possibly could. I would constantly look over my shoulders until I got back to where I launched the kayak. I made it safely. I checked my whole surroundings before stepping out of the water and carrying my kayak back to my car. The other car in the little parking area was still there, but I made a disturbing discovery that may have saved my life. Up until this point, everything that happened could have maybe been explained away. However, I noticed broken glass near the back of my car, and the back passenger side window wasn't there anymore. It had been shattered. I didn't step 1 foot closer to my car. I stayed hidden in the woods and checked if I had bars now that I was closer to the road. I did, and I called 911 successfully. I reported the whole incident and the broken window, and I stated I was scared I was still being followed. Waiting for the police to arrive felt like the longest, most tense moment of my life. It dragged on far too long, but when they pulled into the dirt area, I finally came out from the woods and waved at them. I pointed to the car, and 2 police officers came out and approached the car where they found him, the man from the woods, waiting in the back seat of my car, hiding, waiting for me to enter my car to grab me. It was beyond satisfying to see him arrested. He definitely wasn't smiling anymore. I looked at him, as it almost seemed like he was avoiding looking at me as he was taken to the police car. I'm happy the man was so stupid that he thought I wouldn't notice shattered glass all over the side of my car. What you're about to hear is something that will sound like it was straight from a horror movie, but it's absolutely true. Every summer, my friends and I go on a camping trip to a new location. It's a tradition we've had for years. One year, we chose a hiking trail in West Glacier, Montana. My friend Luke is a photographer, so he always likes to bring his camera equipment and get lots of nature shots. Our first day there, the 3 of us did a lot of hiking and exploring, taking in the sights and allowing Luke to get a lot of shots. That first night there, nothing was out of the ordinary. We had 2 tents. I was alone in mine while the other 2 shared theirs. The next day, we did some fishing at a nearby river, and a few other things that aren't really that interesting to talk about. But that second night was where things got weird. The fire had just been put out, and we went to our respective tents. None of us had even fallen asleep yet, when we started hearing sounds from out in the woods. It was very clearly a person's voice. It sounded like an older woman's voice. It kept getting louder and more clear every 10 seconds or so. I called over to my friend's tent right next to mine, asking if they heard that, and they called back saying yes. Someone was out there. The voice got so close and so clear that we could hear her saying hello. I was shaking in my socks. Maybe you might think we're bad people for not jumping to help an older woman who may have been stranded in the woods, but that just didn't seem right, and being in the middle of the woods at night hearing someone calling out hello is beyond terrifying. I heard footsteps approach the tent, then stop. The voice once again said hello, but it was right outside the tent this time, and now that it was this close, it didn't sound like a woman anymore. It sounded like a man trying to sound like a woman, raising the pitch in his voice. The person outside my tent suddenly started shaking the tent aggressively, and I freaked out and screamed, "What do you want?" My friend shouted to go away to the person. The shaking then stopped as suddenly as it started, and I heard the footsteps quickly hurry away. I waited a few moments before unzipping my tent and grabbing my sleeping bag to go to my friend's tent. Even those brief 5 seconds outside the tent, I felt like I was going to be grabbed at any moment. I felt safer as I was in the tent with them and not alone anymore. None of us knew what to think, but we all three agreed it didn't sound like an actual woman. It sounded like some creepy man pretending to be one to get us to let our guards down. The question was, why though? And was he carrying a weapon? Either way, we didn't think it was safe to get up and leave now. We agreed to leave first thing in the morning as soon as the sun would begin to rise. We also agreed that someone would need to stay awake at all times to keep watch, so we agreed to take turns sleeping. My friend Matt took the first shift, while Luke and I tried to sleep, which was hard to do after what just happened, especially when we'd keep thinking we were hearing footsteps surrounding the tent. Eventually though, after many tense hours, I managed to fall asleep out of pure exhaustion. I never woke up until morning time, because apparently Luke fell asleep on his shift, and we were all asleep by that point. We were happy the sun was up, so we packed our stuff and headed back to the truck. It was a long ride home, and during the drive, Luke was going through his camera looking at the shots that he got over the course of the 2 days there. The last 3 pictures, however, were not pictures that he took. There were 2 pictures taken of our campsite while it was still dark out. The 3rd picture was taken inside of our tent, with all 3 of us asleep. Nothing was missing or stolen, strangely enough, and none of us were attacked in any way, yet it remains the most fucked up thing that has ever happened to any of us. Some random creep out in the woods stalking our tent, and waiting for the right moment to enter our campsite, go through our stuff, sneak into our tent, and take a picture of all 3 of us, probably just to freak us out. And whoever it was, they accomplished their goal for sure.